shame on us as an industry if we don't prepare. We can't whine in 2027 because we say, hey, we didn't know this. We absolutely know what's going to happen. We have time to prepare. We have the tools and data to prepare. And we have a historical roadmap that shows us how we can prepare properly and still be successful.
Hello and welcome everyone to a brand new episode of the Auto Tech Show. Again, live here from New Orleans, Louisiana at the TMC 2024 conference. Now on this episode, I'm very excited to welcome the Senior Vice President of Fleet Operations at Fleet Advantage, Brian Antonellis. With more than 15 years of direct fleet operational experience, Brian is a well-experienced executive in charge of systems and programs that optimize his fleet's efficiency. He has a proven track record of effectively overseeing extensive, intricate, superior, and economical fleet programs, making him the perfect guest for our topic today on how fleet operators can use data to extend their life cycle of their truck fleets. Brian, you must be having a very busy week, so I appreciate your time today, but I know this is a topic that you and your team know very well, so yeah, really looking forward to it. But first and foremost, thanks so much for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me. Look forward to it.
Absolutely. So let's jump straight into it and look at how big data and the integration of it can obviously help with fleets. So looking at the integration of big data, how does it, if we look at both the data capture side and the analytics side of things, contribute to the overall optimization of a truck's life cycle in a fleet? Are there specific insights that can be gained, especially when we look at what you guys focus on with those Class 8 commercial trucks?
Absolutely. So you think about data, and really that drives all the decisions we make. Mm-hmm. So when you think about a truck, there's different components that make up the cost, right? You have a small component, which is the finance piece. Mm-hmm. But about 62 to 63% of the total expense to run a truck is fuel. About 20% of the expenses, your R&M, repair and maintenance cost, yep. And the rest is your payment. Right? So when you think about data, a lot of people will get focused on what the acquisition price of the truck is. You know, can I go into the dealer and can I get it for $1,000 less? Really, in the grand scheme of it, it doesn't matter. Right? It's a very small percentage of the cost. So when we think about data, it's understanding your MPG data mm-hmm. and understanding your R&M data. And, you know, we found data to be impactful. We have a proprietary system that does a couple things. One, it helps you understand where your cost is today. But two, because you're trying to manage life cycle. So when should I take that vehicle out of service? Mm-hmm. So it helps us project what that looks like by vertical industry. Right. So I'll walk you through one that kind of shows you a good example of it. So typically in a truck, we talk about fuel being the number one cost. If you go through the life cycle of a truck, year 1, 2, 3, probably 4, if you're running about 100,000 miles a year, you're going to get optimal fuel economy. But what's happening in the industry during those years where you're running it? It's getting about 2% better every year. Mm-hmm. So by year 4, you're probably 8% behind a new truck. In year 4, somewhere between year 4 and year 5, you're going to start to see fuel degradation. The engine just isn't as tight as it once was. So you'll start losing 1% or 2% a year. So within a 4-year life cycle, you can have a 10% swing. And if fuel is 62, 63% of your total cost, it can change dramatically. Yeah. So understanding how your fuel curve is going to work through the first 4, 5, 6 years of the vehicle, and overlaying that with your R&M curve. So for a typical tractor, Class 8, you'll start with about 2 cents per mile to maintain the truck in year 1. Year 2 is somewhere between 3.5 and 4 cents. By the time you get to year 4, you're probably at 8 cents a mile. When you jump to year 5, 6, 7, 8, you're going to see a rapid escalation of cost to somewhere between 15 to 19 cents a mile. So when you think about the impact of fuel has, and you think about the impact of R&M and you watch them go through the life of a tractor, mm-hmm. absolutely the most important thing you can do to reduce cost and run your fleet efficiently is to understand, using data, how your tractor is performing, being able to take in multiple inputs from your ECM off the tractor, as well as your maintenance software system. Whether it's yours or you use a third party, it really doesn't matter. You just got to capture the data. And then managing your life cycle so that you're removing the truck before you see dramatic fuel degradation and before that R&M curve dramatically turns up on you. So, you'll see we're here at TMC. You'll see a lot of people looking, can I buy a cheap tire for a little bit lower cost? Not cheaper, but a little lower cost. Can I drive some cost out of my system? And I always tell them, listen, you can do those types of things, but there's nothing you're going to do on a single component or even a couple of different parts that you buy that's going to be more impactful than moving that truck and getting a replacement for it at the right time. And that's different for every truck, right? It's not guaranteed that it's exactly 4 years. Every truck runs a little bit different, runs different miles. Some go out with 40,000 pounds and come back empty, so they have a really light return.
Yeah, it depends
load.
on the fleet, yeah.
Absolutely. Some go out and they haul backhaul. Some run 200,000 miles a year. Some run 100,000 miles. So you really need to understand how the utilization of that truck affects your MPG curves and your R&M curves, and project where you're going to be so you can run an optimal fleet.
So obviously getting those data points is one aspect of it, but then how do you ensure that that data is then being used effectively? Do you need to work with other partners? Do you have to have an internal team that does that? Like, how do you ensure that that is actually, to your point, being understood and making actionable steps?
It's amazing where transportation has come in the past 15 years.
Okay.
When I first started in this industry, it was a lot of tribal knowledge, a lot of, hey, I know this because this has happened to me in the past. Over the last 15 years, they've sort of caught up and they understand that data drives it. But we've gone through this period where we drown people in data. They're getting data from their telematics providers. They're getting data from their OEMs coming off the ECM. They're getting data from their routing systems. They're getting data from their maintenance software systems. And you look at it, and for example, the maintenance software system, fairly sophisticated. You have VMRS codes, which allow a technician or a third party, whatever one you choose, to apply a cost to it. So 13 would be brakes, 44 would be power plant, right? So you can assign a cost, and it gives you a great understanding of when components fail and how much each component is going to cost for you to manage it throughout its life cycle. But it's very overwhelming. So if you're going to do it internally, you need to put together a team of data analysts and have a system that can help you control all that data. It's always challenging when you go to visit a customer and you're asking them what they look at, and they're just pulling up spreadsheet after spreadsheet after spreadsheet, and they say, I have all this data.
There's no order.
But they're not actionable with it.
Yeah.
Right? So what we try to do, and if you're going to do it internally, people can certainly do that, but you got to invest in being able to take that data, understanding how you want to manage your life cycle, building the tools to be able to do that. At Fleet Advantage, we have a proprietary system called Atlas, and it does just that. It takes in your maintenance data, your fuel data, and then it can go ahead and project, because like I said, not every truck runs the same.
Yeah.
So we group them by industry vertical. Okay. So if you're running food, distribution, not that it's going to be exactly perfect.
But it's better than spreadsheets.
Absolutely. So if we don't have data for year 5 and 6 because we haven't run it yet, we can compare it to an industry vertical that had the similar curve up to that point, and then project it out 2 years. So it's an industry that's come a long way. It's getting fairly sophisticated, and it's driven by a couple of things. One of them is the need to drive down cost.
Yep.
We've seen inflation since COVID, which has put a focus on how we control our cost and how the industry looks at cost. But then also regulation. So I don't know if you're aware, we went through a emissions regulation change in 2024.
Right.
And we're about to go through a rather large change, which is probably driving 80% of the conversation at TMC today in 2027. So, in this industry, it was historically, went to your finance department in Q3 of the year, you asked how much capital they were going to give you. There really wasn't a connection back to how many trucks you needed or why. In Q4, you placed your order, they would deliver sometime the next year, and you get new trucks and everybody would be happy. We're not going to be able to do that anymore. So we're going to need to get that data and develop a 3-year plan. Because in 2027, we're seeing this emissions tightening, which is going to see a $25,000 to $30,000 increase per tractor.
Oh my gosh.
This is an industry that's very comfortable with a 2% increase a year, which may be $5,000 or $6,000. In 27, with this emissions change, we're going to see a $25,000 to $30,000 increase, and it's creating large fleets to think differently about how they do everything, which is, it's a pain point in it's a challenge to work through.
Yeah.
But it's also really good for the industry because it's making them go back to data and say, why do we do the things we do? And how can we use the information we have to set up a 3-year plan? Because we won't be able to just wait to 26 to buy trucks, because large fleets are saying, okay, you're going to raise my price in 2027 by $25,000. I'm going to buy all my trucks in 2026.
Yeah.
And we'll worry about that down the road. Right? So it's definitely a shifting dynamic, but it's been very healthy because it's made people rethink how they view their capital spend, how they view their life cycle, and we're pretty happy to work with our customers to lay that out and say it's still achievable.
Yep.
We just got to plan 3 years and not 3 months.
Yeah, but the tools and solutions are there to help guide those decisions, so they're not blind and they're not perhaps taken advantage of or missed out because of regulation change. The data is there to support the right type of change.
Absolutely. I mean, the tools are there, but it's challenging to the industry.
Yeah.
As we walked over here, we talked about how people come into this industry and stay for a long time. And having that longevity and that consistency is a positive, but it also can be a negative because you start to fall into that sort of trap about thinking about everything the same. Well, the industry is not the same anymore.
Yeah.
We went through COVID, we'll never be the same when we came out of that. And I was talking to a gentleman over at the show, and I said, not that I try to connect the 2027 emission change to COVID, because that affected people in a far more dramatic way. But the end result is going to be similar. Coming out of COVID, we had supply chain challenges. We had demand that was through the roof. We had a market where we had price fluctuation. We know we're going to see that exact same activity in 2027. So in 2020 and 2021, no one was ready. Nobody knew. It was terrible.
Yeah. But now you have a bit of a time to lead up. Absolutely.
So, I think the message for the show and what I've been trying to share is shame on us as an industry if we don't prepare. We can't whine in 2027 because we say, hey, we didn't know this was happening. We absolutely know what's going to happen. We have time to prepare. We have the tools and data to prepare. And we have historical roadmap that shows us how we can prepare properly and still be successful. And for trucking companies that haven't made any change, they can probably still save some money as they go through this next few years.
Do you feel like, and especially maybe with the regulatory changes, but is that what forces change in an industry like this, or are there other aspects that you see that propels companies to want to adapt new technologies or new solutions, or look at their data for once and actually want to use it? Does it take that regulatory compliance aspect to drive a lot of the industries that way, or is there a little bit of the conversation, like events like this, that spark that? Like, how you said, people kind of get stuck in the industry and stuck in the same way of things and they're comfortable, but then a big change is going to happen and you have to change with regulatory stuff. Are there other aspects that help propel change?
Sure. So, I don't want to have stuff thrown at me here and ask for more regulation, but you're absolutely correct. It's the regulation is going to go through probably several iterations because they're still trying to get it right.
Yeah.
You hear about CARB and the California Air Resource Board. And there's a negative view of that regulation, but the reality is they're trying to do a good thing. They may not be spot on now, and they've been adjusting, but they're trying to say, as an industry, we got to move to a cleaner way of doing things. We need to still be able to run our business. We still need to be able to make some money, but we need to do it in a little bit cleaner way. So, with hoping nobody throws anything at me when I walk back into the show, I think regulation to some extent has challenged the industry, but it's probably been a good thing. I want to see how today the way they describe regulation is going to be very challenging, but I think they're going to adapt and sort of look at some of those challenges as we get closer to 27 and adapt and mold so we can find that balance that we need where companies can still operate and be profitable and pay their employees, but still keep our eye on, can we do this cleaner? Can we do it better? And at the end of the day, can we, not belch as much black smoke out as we used to? On that topic of regulation and being clean, one of the things that you hear people talk about alternative fuels or EVs.
All over the place, yeah.
And at the industry, it's slowly moving that way. Technology quite hasn't caught up, but we shouldn't look past the improvements that diesel has done. And you don't drive down the road anymore and see black smoke pouring out of new trucks. You look at the regulations where you get your NOx levels down to 0.04, and by 2027 we'll be at 0.02. Those are key milestones that it's good for everybody. It's good for the industry. It's good for the consumers. So yeah, I think we're going to end up in a world where diesel is still a portion of the power, and we're going to have some EV, and we're going to have some hydrogen fuel cell, and we're going to have some natural gas, and that's probably good, but it's going to be different. Today we're almost exclusively diesel in Class 8, and people are looking at it going, I know we got to get there, but it's going to be hard to end up with a diversified platform. We're going to have to reset the dealer networks. We're going to have to train up. Today a truck pulls in, and sure, there's a Kenworth dealer or an international dealer, but if you need tires, brakes, or basic maintenance items, you can pull into any of those dealers. The large truck stops you see on the side of the road. Imagine a world where if you're driving natural gas, you have to find a dealer that can service natural gas.
Changes your whole route, doesn't it?
Right. And where are the charging systems and how does that build out? But listen, it's an exciting time in the industry, and sure, there's a point of view there that says, hey, let's be negative and look at the challenges. Well, there's also some great opportunities, and we're going to see some companies change and evolve, and we'll see some probably die off, but that's been the same in the trucking and distribution industry for 100 years, so it's not really going to matter.
With what your team does, you must relish in these challenges, because it's sort of like you said, it's an opportunity to look at something a different way rather than just see it as a negative. And what your team's doing with understanding this data portion in a large way, you can actually propose change, and you can actually propose solutions based on real information rather than just, well, that's the way it used to be done, or that we don't think it's going to be like that. So when stuff does come up, you guys must just love the challenge.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we feel the pressure like everybody else to come up with solutions, but I think we come at it from a point of view of, listen, in general, the regulation is trying to do a good thing. Is it perfect? Probably not. Will they have to tweak it? Probably. We've seen them shift. So we have two different regulation boards. You have CARB, California Air Resource Board, and you have the EPA. And even in the 24 to 27, they were running on different pathways. Over the last 6 months, they've aligned that after 27, they're going to have the same regulations going forward. And do I know if that's going to stay from now? There'll probably be some tweaks and adjustments, but in general, it's a positive. We're trying to leave a cleaner planet. We're trying to run trucks more efficiently. And for this industry, well, for some other industries, when they go through change like that, there's always a cost impact. In this industry, there's a cost opportunity because we weren't running as efficiently before. And some of these alternative vehicles make us think different about how we route, where we buy fuel, what customers we work with, that can we hook up a charger at a customer's location so we can charge while we're offloading. We didn't do that before. We just ran the lowest number of miles. So there's great opportunity in the industry, and we should feel positive about it.
And a lot of that came from understanding the data points that maybe were ignored before. Like I mentioned earlier, I think a lot of points of collection are maybe new, and all of that new data, I think understanding it comes back to understanding it at its core and being able to use it. And I think a lot of people still are not fully understanding the full capacity and the potential of that data. Is that something you see with the people you work with as well?
Absolutely.
Is it changing?
It is. Probably the biggest hurdle that we've had to overcome as we talk about this for the past 20 years has been that point of view of, well, this is the way we've always done it, or this is a cost of doing business. So people would never look at their fuel bill and say, why do I pay $5 million?
They just accept what they have.
They just accept it. And they'd look at their trucks and they'd say, well, the data's telling me I get 6 miles per gallon. What if I came back and said, well, your industry is really getting 7.2. And when we take that data, it's not just about knowing where you're at. It's about that continuous improvement model going forward. So everybody uses it a little bit different, but the part where I get excited about is when we're getting ready to build, because we're building trucks every year for a customer, right? There's a natural replacement cycle. And when you're pulling that data in, and I can look at, okay, what OEM did we have? What power plant did we use? Was it a 15 liter, a 13 liter, an 11 liter? Was it a proprietary like a Volvo where they run their own 13 liter? Or did you go out and did you get a 15 liter Cummins? And then you start watching that data come in. and you can start looking by area of the country based on the work they do, what's the best engine transmission package to put in there? Well, on these particular units, we ran a full aero package. We were able to get up to 8.8 to 8.9 miles per gallon.
Incredible.
And then you'd look at another area and they were down at 7, so you'd go, okay, what's different?
Yep.
Is it the work they do? Is it because they're going up and down the street making 17 deliveries while that guy's running cross country? That's real, but being able to understand how they're performing and deep dive into not only the spec of the truck, but also the business. I tell our customers all the time, I need to know your business. When we go out to start working with a customer, they'll say, well, let's pull out the truck specs. Let's look at what we got. I said, I want to go out with your driver.
Yeah,
I want to see what you're doing. I want my team to go out and see how they operate, right? And not just in perfect conditions where you send everybody that wants to take your headquarters route.
Yeah, the route, yeah.
I want to see what it's really like. The driver that's out in the middle of winter in Illinois and it's minus 10 degrees like we had, and he's letting his truck idle, and that's why it's driving 6 or 7 miles per gallon, not the 9 that we're seeing in other places. Could we put a auxiliary power unit that'll use a tenth of the fuel than letting the truck run overnight? But you need to experience what they're doing and learn their business, and then match it up versus the data and make really actionable decisions that can drive cost out of the system and make it work towards regulation at the same time.
So for those that are maybe at the start of their journey in understanding data points, or they're maybe partway through it, or they haven't done it at all, what's your kind of main call to action on what they can see most notably immediately when they start to actually interpret this data or use it?
Yeah, so you look at where that cost comes from, right? So it's fuel and maintenance drive 80-something% of your total cost. So while people will try to go look at acquisition price, really understand how your truck is performing from an MPG standpoint, not at a snapshot in time, but historically how it's performed. It's great if you can go back and get several years of data that start in year one and move through. If you can't, the industry has data out there that can help you understand what that curve should look like. But go where you fish where the fish are. And the fish is in your fuel and your repair and maintenance cost and managing that life cycle. So if you can start there, even if there are additions you want to add to the truck or spec enhancements, you're going to most likely have cost savings that can offset some of those increased costs. The example I gave around, should we put an auxiliary power unit on a truck that is running and out overnight and they're really cold? Well, if you go in with the focus of, I need to add a $15,000 to $20,000 component to my truck, it's viewed negatively.
Yeah.
If we go out there and say, understand your data, how much fuel you're spending, what the offset looks like, and then project it out over your 4, 5, 6 year life cycle, if you're able to save $8,000 a year in fuel because you're running a small auxiliary motor versus your large diesel motor all night, you're not losing money, you're saving money. You're making a $15,000 investment to save $30,000 at the end of the life cycle of the vehicle. And that's a totally different conversation. And that only happens when you can get a good view and a good understanding of how your truck operates, the two main components, R&M and fuel, and how they marry up together, and how key that life cycle and targeting a proper life cycle is.
So you have these conversations with fleet operators and with, the people on the ground. Do they get it? Or is it a sell? Is it a hard sell to understand that? Obviously the data supports you, so you have that on your side, and people can't refute data points. But at the end of the day, they still have to commit to wanting to change. Is that a hard sell?
It's not really, because I'll tell you, some of them think they can do it internally, and some companies are very successful. But for us, it's really, as you dig through the data, two things happen. One, it's their data.
Yeah, it's their
own
points.
We're not telling you something and you're hoping that it's backed up by fact. It actually came off your system. You sent it to us. Yeah. We connected an API. We pulled it in, and you can see it. And they can say, oh yeah, that's Minnesota. They run lower. That's Georgia. Of course, it runs a better MPG there. And then it's about really breaking out of just the fleet or transportation industry and trying to educate customers as a whole. One of the most challenging things we do is connecting operations and finance on a daily basis. So as they go through, sure, the fleet manager, fleet director, transportation manager, they say, yeah, I know what you're telling me about saving some fuel, but I really like this dealer, I really like this truck. It's a different conversation when you put the CFO in the room and you start talking about, do you want to invest in an appreciating asset? And if you're going to invest in an appreciating asset, how do you want to manage it for lowest cost? Right? So, yes, they are tough conversations to get people to open up and understand that it has to be looked at differently, but they're received very well. We have customers that we pride ourselves on is what we call our exchange program. Knowing that a truck life cycle depends on how you use it, doesn't really make much sense to say, I'm going to wait till next year to order trucks. Mm-hmm. So what we do is we're constantly evaluating the data on a quarterly basis, overlaying how it looks to its life cycle and how it's going to affect total cost, and making decisions. These 17 trucks should be replaced. We don't have to wait till all 200 needs to be replaced. These ones have met their life cycle. These ones are costing you more money. Let's pull them out. We call that an exchange program. In the industry, some people call it a technology refresh. But we're constantly refreshing the fleet, targeting the vehicles right at that economic tipping point, and putting new equipment in there. So when we do that, we have customers that we've done 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 exchanges with where they buy into the program. And when we come in and sit down and we talk about, hey, what's your cost to run your fleet? They understand that it's what's my total life cycle cost and where is my vehicle in that life cycle journey? Is it still performing strong at 3 years? Or are we starting to see fuel degradation? Or are we starting to see the R&M curve spike up? One of the things that we do as we go through that process with them is they get assigned a fleet director. And that fleet director, while yes, we'll look at the cost quarterly and run the projection farm, but we're also looking at the day-to-day. Mm-hmm. And that data tells you a story about how you can help manage your business. So if you saw an MPG drop in a location and you were able to go in and say, you know what, 80% of the trucks are running fine. These 7 trucks have an issue. Turns out they're all one model year, one engine type. Well, maybe there was an update. Maybe it needs to be reflashed. Do we have some transmission parameters and shift points that aren't lining up correctly? What told us that? The data told us that. It told us, go look here. These trucks are doing something that is pulling them out of the norm for the rest of their grouping. So I think that's sort of the fun aspect of it too, is when you can go out there and not only can we help you from a life cycle standpoint, but how do you become actionable day to day? That data tells a story as you're trying to manage the equipment.
Yeah, and I think understanding that is the key to success, specifically as we move forward with these regulatory changes. Like you said, you need to understand it. Otherwise, it's kind of be left behind, I guess, at this point.
Yeah, one of the examples I use when you're thinking about what kind of trucks you need, how many you need, doing all that fleet planning is, when things change. So back in 2010, we moved to emission systems on trucks. And what did that do? There was another activity, it's called a regeneration, where there's a capture system at the end of the truck, right at the end of the exhaust pipe, that processes the emissions, lowers the NOx, takes out any soot, so what comes out of a truck is very clean. Yeah. But on a regular basis, you have to regenerate it, which means they bring it up to a really high temperature and they burn off all that soot that's in the truck, in the system, in the filter, and you go through that process. What takes, say, back in 2010, it was probably 45 minutes to an hour, 2-3 times a week, depending on your driving habits, how much you're on the highway. Well, what does that do to your trucks? So your drivers lose 3 hours out of their 40 or 50 hours for the week. So how many trucks do you need, and what's the activity? So we realized that if you could go in and clean that filter at 200,000 miles instead of waiting to 400,000 miles, it wouldn't be 3 times a week, it would be 1 time a week.
Yeah, well, that's a great example to end on, where actually you see the data actually making real change. I think that's a fantastic way to end, and a way for people listening to really see that change can happen if you actually start using your data. So, Brian, thank you so very much. This has been amazing, and really looking forward to the next steps, and hopefully have a great next few days here at Team C. So again, thank you so much.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And everyone watching and listening to this podcast, thank you so very much for joining us on this show. Hopefully you learned a little bit. I've learned a ton, which is always fantastic, and especially with experts here at TMC in New Orleans. But if you have any questions about what you heard today on the show, please feel free to reach out directly. Just head down to the podcast notes, look for the LinkedIn for either Brian or myself, reach out, drop us a line, and we'll be happy to talk to you and answer some questions or add to the conversation. We love how that propels new episodes and new conversations down the line. So with that, we'll bring this episode to a close. Thank you all so very much again for joining us on this episode. Wishing you a fantastic day wherever in the world you may be. We'll see you on the next episode very soon. Bye for now.